Every war, every election, every revolution in history was driven by one thing, an idea. An idea about how the world should be run, who should have power, and how people should live their lives. These ideas have names. They are called ideologies. And whether you know it or not, every government on Earth right now is built on one of them. Today we are going through the major political ideologies in order, from the oldest to the most modern. No sides, no agenda, just history and facts. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what each one means, where it came from, and why it still matters today. Let's start from the beginning. The oldest form of government in human history is monarchy. One ruler, total power, usually inherited through family. For thousands of years, this was simply how the world worked. The pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of China, the kings of Europe. The idea was simple. One strong leader keeps order. Everyone else follows. And for a long time it worked. But people began asking a question that monarchy could not answer. What happens when the king is terrible? What happens when the person born into power is cruel, incompetent, or simply does not care about the people they rule? There was no answer. And that question eventually changed everything. Number 2, oligarchy. When people got tired of one ruler, they sometimes replaced them with a small group of rulers. This is called oligarchy. The word comes from ancient Greek, meaning rule by the few. In ancient Athens, before democracy existed, a small group of wealthy and powerful men made every decision for everyone else. In Sparta, a council of elders called the Gerousia held most of the real power. The idea behind oligarchy was that a group of wise and experienced people would make better decisions than a single king. And sometimes that was true. But the problem with oligarchy is the same problem that always appears when power is concentrated. The people in charge start making decisions that benefit themselves, not the people they govern. Oligarchy never really went away either. It just got better at hiding. Many historians argue that several modern governments that call themselves democracies are actually functioning oligarchies, where a small group of extremely wealthy and connected people hold the real power behind the scenes. Number 3, theocracy. What if the ruler was not just a king or a council? What if the ruler was God himself, or at least someone who claimed to speak for God? This is theocracy, government based entirely on religious law and religious authority. Ancient Egypt was partly theocratic because the pharaoh was considered a living god. Medieval Europe was heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, which at its peak had more power than most kings. The Church could excommunicate rulers, launch crusades, and decide what was morally and legally acceptable across an entire continent. Today, the most clear example of a theocracy is Iran, where religious leaders hold ultimate authority above elected officials. The appeal of theocracy is that it gives government a sense of absolute moral authority. If the laws come from God, then who can argue with them? But the problem is obvious. Different people believe in different gods, and different versions of the same God. And throughout history, those differences have started more wars than almost anything else. Number 4, republicanism. By now, a pattern is emerging. Every system so far concentrates power in the hands of very few people. And every time that happens, the same problems appear: corruption, abuse, and eventually revolt. So thinkers began asking a different question. What if power belonged to the people through representatives they chose themselves? This is republicanism. Ancient Rome built one of the most sophisticated republics the world had ever seen. Citizens voted for representatives called senators who debated and passed laws. It was not perfect. Only certain men could vote. Slavery existed. Corruption was rampant. But the core idea was revolutionary. Power should be accountable to the people it governs. That idea never died. It survived the fall of Rome, the Middle Ages, and eventually became the foundation of the United States government in 1776. Number 5, liberalism. By the 1600s and 1700s, something extraordinary was happening in Europe. People were reading more, thinking more, and questioning everything. This period was called the Enlightenment, and out of it came one of the most influential ideologies in modern history, Liberalism. Not liberal in the way the word gets used in political arguments today. Classical liberalism in its original form was about one core idea: the individual matters. Every single person has natural rights that no king, no church, and no government can take away. The right to life, the right to liberty, the right to property. A philosopher named John Locke wrote about these ideas in the late 1600s, and his words echoed across the Atlantic Ocean. You can find them almost word for word in the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Liberalism argued that governments exist to protect people's rights, not to control them. And if a government fails to protect those rights, the people have every right to replace it. That idea alone triggered multiple revolutions: the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and dozens more across the 1800s. Liberalism became the ideological foundation of the modern Western world. Number 6. Conservatism. But not everyone was excited about all this revolution and change. Some thinkers looked at the chaos of the French Revolution, where thousands of people were executed in the streets, and asked a very reasonable question: is tearing everything down actually a good idea? This gave birth to conservatism. The core idea of conservatism is not that change is always bad. It is that change should be slow, careful, and respectful of what already works. A philosopher named Edmund Burke watched the French Revolution unfold and argued that society is not just a contract between people alive today. It is a contract between the past, the present, and the future. Traditions and institutions exist for a reason. They represent thousands of years of accumulated human wisdom. You do not tear them down overnight just because a new idea sounds good in theory. Conservatism became enormously influential across Europe and eventually in the United States. It argued for gradual reform over radical revolution, for stability over disruption, and for the preservation of cultural and social traditions that hold communities together. The tension between liberalism and conservatism, between change and stability, between the individual and tradition, is arguably the central debate of every Western democracy for the past 200 years, and it is still going on right now. Number 7. Socialism. By the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution had changed everything. Factories were everywhere. Cities were exploding in population, and a new class of people emerged: the working class. Men, women, and children working 16-hour days in dangerous conditions for barely enough money to survive. While the factory owners became extraordinarily wealthy, thinkers began asking whether this was really the best humanity could do. And out of that question came socialism. The core idea of socialism is simple. The wealth produced by workers should be shared more equally among the people who actually produce it. Instead of one factory owner keeping all the profit, the workers who built the products should share in the rewards. Socialism argued that key industries like healthcare, education, and energy should be owned or controlled by the public rather than private individuals chasing profit. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, arguing that capitalism would always exploit workers and that a fairer system was not just possible but inevitable. Many modern countries today use elements of socialism alongside capitalism: universal healthcare, public schools, state-owned railways. These are all socialist ideas operating inside otherwise capitalist economies. Socialism never fully replaced capitalism, but it permanently changed it. Number 8. Communism. Socialism asked for a fairer share. Communism went much further. Where socialism said, "Let us reform the system," communism said, "Let us abolish it entirely." Karl Marx envisioned a world where there was no private property, no ruling class, no exploitation. Everyone contributes according to their ability and receives according to their need. A true classless society. In theory, it sounds appealing. In practice, every attempt to build a communist state in the 20th century resulted in authoritarian rule, restricted freedoms, and in some cases, mass starvation. The Soviet Union under Stalin, China under Mao, Cambodia under Pol Pot. Each claimed to be building the communist ideal. Each produced some of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in recorded history. The debate over whether communism failed because the idea itself is flawed or because it was simply never implemented correctly is one that continues to this day, but the historical record is impossible to ignore. Number 9. Fascism. If communism came from the far left of the political spectrum, then fascism came screaming in from the far right. Fascism emerged in Europe in the early 20th century as a response to the chaos of World War I, economic collapse, and the fear of communist revolution. It rejected both capitalism and communism. Instead, it placed the nation above everything: the race, the culture, the state. Individual rights meant nothing compared to the glory of the nation. Fascism demanded total loyalty to a single powerful leader. It used propaganda, fear, and violence to silence opposition. Benito Mussolini built the first fascist state in Italy. In the 1920s, Adolf Hitler took the ideology to its most extreme and catastrophic conclusion in Germany. The result was World War II and the Holocaust, the deliberate murder of 6 million Jewish people and millions of others. Fascism is the clearest example in modern history of what happens when an ideology abandons every moral boundary in pursuit of power. It is also a reminder that dangerous ideologies do not always announce themselves clearly. They often rise slowly, wrapped in the language of national pride and restoration. Number 10. Anarchism. After covering monarchies, dictators, fascists, and communists, you might be wondering if there is an ideology that simply wants to get rid of all of it. There is. Anarchism. The word anarchism comes from the Greek meaning without rulers. Anarchists believe that all forms of hierarchical authority are illegitimate and harmful. No kings, no presidents, no governments, no bosses, just free individuals and communities organizing themselves voluntarily. The most common misunderstanding about anarchism is that it means chaos. It does not. Anarchists argue that without oppressive power structures, people would naturally cooperate and organize fairly. That violence and crime are largely products of inequality, and oppression not human nature. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, anarchism was a genuinely powerful political movement. Anarchist groups carried out assassinations of political leaders across Europe and America. Several American presidents received death threats from anarchist movements. President William McKinley was actually assassinated by an anarchist in 1901. But anarchism never succeeded in building a lasting alternative society. Its most famous real-world experiment was in parts of Spain during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, where anarchist communities briefly self-governed entire regions. It lasted only a few years before being crushed by Franco's fascist forces. Anarchism remains more of a philosophical challenge to power than a practical system of government. But its core question is one that every political thinker has to answer. Why should anyone have power over anyone else? Number 11. And the final ideology is one that shapes the modern world more than any other: capitalism. The idea that individuals should be free to own property, start businesses, and trade freely in an open market. That competition drives innovation, that prices set by supply and demand allocate resources better than any government ever could. Capitalism is not just an economic system, it is an ideology. It shapes laws, cultures, and values across the entire planet. And it is the dominant ideology of the modern world, regardless of where you live. But like every ideology on this list, it is not without its critics. Some argue it produces extreme inequality, that it rewards greed over compassion. Others argue it has produced more wealth and quality of life improvement than any other system in human history. Both sides have a point. And that tension is still playing out in every election and every economic debate happening anywhere on Earth today. Every single ideology on this list was created by people trying to solve the same problem. How do we live together fairly? None of them got it perfectly right, and none of them got it completely wrong either. The world you live in today is shaped by a mixture of almost all of them, and understanding where these ideas came from is the first step to understanding the world around you. Thanks for watching.